None of these staggered election seats would take place immediately, but this gives us the chance to have the conversation with the voters about how to create greater institutional retention and knowledge and less turnover amongst the council members as we move forward.
Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda right there, bringing up a novel concept this week, staggered elections, alternating the years we vote on certain city council seats. Plus, the finishing touches on the drug use and possession law the council has been working on over the past several months. We're talking about that, a study of drug use on transit, a larger investment in Seattle tourism, and a whole lot more. That's what we're breaking down this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. My co-host is David Crome, who, of course, is a reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I just wanted to check in here. A number of route restrictions on the Seattle to Bainbridge ferry route. Half the sailings canceled, I'm reading. You can't bring a wheeled vehicle, bikes included. How are you doing, my friend?
Well, fortunately, I don't use that route hardly ever, so I'm doing great. I can't say the same for the people who live on Bainbridge Island who are maybe trying to get on and off.
Yeah, that is not fun at all. So I appreciate the feedback. Glad you're doing well, my friend. Thank you, David. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. This week's shout out is to our patron, Eric. Thank you, Eric, always for your feedback and working on making the show better. We're going to keep in touch, my man. I appreciate you reaching out to me. If you'd like to support the show like Eric does, ask some questions, get them answered, well, become a patron. We will send you this highly sought-after Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker, this decal, for just $5 a month in support. We also feature your sticker shots on the video version of the podcast, which airs on Converge Media Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much, Converge. Thank you very much, Eric. All right, let's get going with right here, right now. We need to start this week with the drug use and drug possession law that the City Council has been crafting over the past several months. This week in the Public Safety Committee meeting, required before full council approval, there are 5 amendments proposed here. I'm going to try to summarize them in this way. It's a little bit of a mess. The council staff's own memo on this legislation notes several problems. I'm going to focus on 3 right here. 1, the idea of only arresting people who are a harm to others, not themselves. Well, the way the law is written, there's really nothing in the place to stop an officer from arresting someone possessing drugs, so there are some problems with clarity on what officers are supposed to do. 2, the dollars the mayor had said he was going to set aside for drug treatment, etc., $27 million. The council has not received the necessary appropriations to get that money. 3, the pre-arrest diversion programs the council wants to put drug users into. These are programs run by groups like LEAD, Let Everyone Advance with Dignity. Well, they don't have the capacity to take in more people. And David, I'm just highlighting 3 issues that jump out at me. There are definitely more here. What do you make of all the amendments the council is considering for this new drug law?
I make of it that this was never going to be easy because this problem is not easy. We're talking about subjective decisions on the part of law enforcement. That's always tricky because it kind of leaves people unclear about what exactly is being enforced and what isn't. Money and capacity around treatment is kind of the ball game on a lot of this stuff. Lots of people voice support for treatment, but where those people go for treatment and its effectiveness and long-term sustainability, I mean, that's always been the kind of big question on this. And so everybody, I think, is saddened and frustrated by the drug use and fentanyl overdoses in Seattle. And I think as a result of that, there's a lot of sort of rightful calls for immediate action. But at the same time, it's not always immediately clear what that immediate action looks like, or anyone sort of fooling themselves if they think that there's like a easy kind of switch to flip here that is going to immediately kind of change the situation on hand.
Yeah, and you talk about the immediacy of this, and I really think another big issue here is timing, because the council's working right now to pass this law, but the mayor is promising an executive order further clarifying the police policies after the council passes this law. So it's really not clear how that's going to interact, the mayor and the council on this one. And this very much is a work in progress. I get it, but of the groups that were supposed to be meeting to work on solutions, like the folks in diversion, the treatment people, the courts, we're told in the council memo, only the courts group has had some meetings on the impact of this law. I just get the feeling with this, David, that the council is kind of building the plane at 30,000 feet, and it doesn't look at all finished right now. And I just wanted to get your take on that, the timing of this, and how this is going to be, I guess, enacted over the next several months, if indeed the council is able to pass this week.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and to be fair, I think to a certain extent, the state policy is the same way, that it's being built as it, the plane's being built as it flies, because again, a lot of it, the misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor was put back into place on the agreement that there would be sort of commensurate treatment, and money for that. And so, but again, it's like, where is that treatment, and who's going to do it? It's I agree that it does feel like the city council is sort of building this as they go, but to be fair to them, so is everybody. And so the timing of it, I think the one part that maybe gives some folks a little uneasiness is what does kind of go immediately into effect is the authority to prosecute. And, I think that was kind of Councilmember Lewis's skepticism about it the last time around, which is, the one thing it does sort of immediately open up is a path to jail. And for some people, that's what they want, and that's why they're pushing for this legislation. But if you're of the mind that it needs to, that this all needs to kind of work together with law enforcement and treatment and service providers, then there's clearly still a little ways to go on that.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to say the devil's in the details, where there's a lot of devils on this one, because we're talking about a ton of details that the council is going to try to work through this week. We'll see what the fallout of this is, but I'm glad we were able to bring that up, David, because I know it's a council discussion that they're hoping to get done before they really jump into their budget issues here in the next couple of weeks. So there's a lot happening here with the city council and drug laws. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. All right, moving ahead, there's an issue I've been thinking about a lot, and it looks like the council is going to take some action on it. The council is talking about staggering its elections, so letting the public vote on changing our system to shorten the terms of 4 council seats, districts 2, 4, and 6, and citywide seat 9, to 2 years for 1 term only. And so that would mean all even council seats would be on the ballot in 2029 and 2033, all odd council seats on the ballot in 2027, 2031, 2035. Now, this is a resolution in the Housing and Finance Committee brought up by Councilmember Mosqueda this week. And David, I wanted to break this down with you. As fun as it is to have 7 seats up for the council this year, we're looking at possibly a lot of turnover, a lot of institutional knowledge going away when you potentially get rid of 7 of the 9 people on the group that leads your city, possibly 8, if Councilmember Mosqueda wins her bid to join the county council. Some thoughts about this, the idea of staggered elections?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little, I don't know if irony is the right word, but this is how it used to be that we would do 4 and 5. Of course, we didn't have districts either, so it was 4 citywide, 5 citywide, back and forth. It was only when we switched to district elections that we ended up with having 7 every year. I think it is a challenge for everybody to have that many people up for election at once. Certainly on the, speaking from own professional experience, certainly on the media side, I think it's sort of undeniable that in these years when there are 7 seats up for election, I mean, again, in Mosqueda's case, really more, each position doesn't really get the same shake that they do in the other years where it's just 2 people. And, that's the combination of all those elections with a downsized media landscape. I do think that's a bit of disservice to the voters that, they just don't get the coverage that they probably deserve. That's not really the council's problem. I think from their perspective, it's like you were saying that, it just is a pretty intense thing. There's inevitably, you talk to some council members and they say it's maybe a year, even maybe a little bit more before they kind of get their sea legs under them on the city council. And so if you have minimum 4 new council members up to 8, I guess, new council members, that's a lot of people to be getting their sea legs under them all at the same time.
Yeah, and it's not like these people are not intelligent or whatever else. We're just talking about learning the ropes of how things get done at City Hall, making the different connections, learning how legislation gets passed. This is all the pieces of this. And you make a really good point here, David. A majority of city council members are kind of gone regardless of what happens here. We're talking about council members Peterson, Juarez, Herbold, and Sawant not running again, combined with Councilmember Mosqueda really looking like she's going to win that county seat. I would be surprised if she doesn't. So there's 5 right there. And I think it's interesting, David, and looking further at this, we had a number of city council legislative aides in the past running as candidates. I'm talking about Dan Strauss, who's actually running again, Peterson and Herbold, just a few examples there. That's not really who's running this year. Are you surprised that City Hall hasn't produced more candidates coming up from the minor leagues, as it were? Why aren't those legislative aides running in these races?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I hadn't actually considered that. Part of it might be the same reason why you have people like Councilmember Peterson dipping out after one term. Before him, you had Rob Johnson dipping out after just 3 years. It's kind of a hard job, and it's fairly thankless.
Yeah,
the city council, right or wrong, is the kind of symbol of a lot of people's frustrations with the city. And so, if you're an aide, you see that fairly close up. So yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I hadn't really considered that before.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see where these different candidates come from. Maritza Rivera, obviously with the Office of Arts and Culture, is a candidate in District 4, but that's really the only city-produced candidate that's in the mix here. And I'm interested in what that means in terms of learning the ropes, as we say, and trying to figure out where legislation goes. But the staggered elections, They're talking about it in committee this week. They're looking on having the full council hopefully pass this, again, before their budget deliberations really kick in at the end of this month. So there is a lot still ahead here. All right, well, up next, we've got a lot more to talk about here, folks. A new twist on our drug crisis, a study on drugs that are affecting transit, or maybe they're not affecting transit, and some reaction from transit drivers about these results, too. That's next on Now Hear This. Okay, so you may have heard about this study from last week. The UW took a look at drug use on public transit. The results of their study, the traces of drugs were found on buses and trains, but those traces were so small, there was no risk, a health risk, to bus operators or passengers. Here's what one of the researchers, Rob Hendrickson, had to say about this.
I have no concerns about operators feeling the effects of fentanyl and methamphetamine based on the numbers from this study.
The report said, okay, transit systems, maybe improve your filter systems, clean up the buses, the trains a little bit more, and there you have it. But soon after that, Ken Price, the president of Amalgamated Transit Union Local 587, repping transit workers throughout the Seattle area, reacted, and he said, well, thanks for the study, but does this really measure long-term effects? He's concerned about that. And also he was asking this very basic question of, hey, don't worry, the study says everything is okay. Price is saying it's not okay. And David, I thought this was interesting because I wanted to get your reaction to this story. What does this study say to you? And what do you think about the reaction of some of these transit drivers?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a few layers to this. I think it's sort of saying a couple things. And I think maybe in some ways it's been received as saying one thing, which is... it's saying, on the one hand, it is saying that drugs are incredibly prevalent on Metro because I can't remember if it was meth or fentanyl. I think it was meth. Traces of meth were basically found on every single
100%
bus that they sampled. And at the same time, they're saying, that that meth does not, or that, that residue does not pose sort of an immediate threat to the drivers. I think for some people, those two things were seen as contradictory. I don't think they are. I think the former can be a problem. I think it is acknowledging that regardless of whether or not that residue poses a physical harm to the drivers, which most studies I've seen or most evidence suggests secondhand fentanyl smoke or something like that really is not a physical threat to people. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that it's like a pleasant thing for the drivers to be operating these buses while people are using meth or fentanyl on their bus. So, there are plenty of reasons why that is problematic for the drivers, aside from, any sort of threat of fentanyl smoke. I think I think a lot of people heard it, digested this report as being dismissive of the concerns. I don't think that's true. I think it confirms a lot of the concerns in a lot of ways, which is what I
Yeah.
said. It's just I don't think anybody is arguing that that's a good environment for the operators when they're
Okay.
running these buses when there's a lot of drug use in the back. What they are saying, and I think this is confirmed by most other studies, is that the risk to their health is not via the secondhand inhalation. Again, I don't think that's to downplay that. It's just an unpleasant experience for them a lot of the time.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. You brought up that factoid there about the amount of methamphetamine found on these different surfaces, and it was surfaces, I should say, and it was found on 100% of them. And that's not reassuring right there. And I think the bigger issue here, David, is we've been talking about public drug use in the general terms there, in terms of what Seattle's doing about it. And I think there's just a push to say, okay, using drugs on transit is just, it's not a comfortable situation for anybody involved, for passengers, for transit drivers, or anything along those lines. And trying to make a change there, I think, is what the transit drivers are talking about too. Make it less of a welcoming thing for people to want to do drugs on transit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm being repetitive here, I know, but that is I think the key point that's being lost is it doesn't have to be that fentanyl smoke is like it doesn't have to be proven that secondhand fentanyl smoke is harmful for you to also acknowledge that nobody wants to be sitting around people smoking fentanyl or meth. And that can be a really uncomfortable situation for operators and drivers. And I don't know that there's any disagreement on that, despite what some of the narrative has been around this report, because it's in Metro's interest to figure this out because they're trying to win back riders, they're trying to bolster service, and again, I don't. I'm a transit user, I'm a transportation reporter. I don't want to be sitting next to people smoking fentanyl or using meth. I don't think anybody does. And so for Metro, it's a priority to try and figure this out for reasons beyond whether or not it's a threat to your health.
Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down. I just, that's the whole piece of this. I think there's an understanding about these different health issues, whatever else, but there's another piece of it of trying to figure out how to dissuade that drug use on buses. And do you have any knowledge about that? Like, what is Metro doing to try to handle that situation? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't know sort of what's exactly in the works. There's talk about, I think, Sound Transit and Metro are talking about more security. I think that's kind of the main focus right now is around security. But yeah, I don't know. I've been curious to kind of check back in with some of the fare ambassador programs and see how that's working. But
yes,
I think they've got a little bit of a road ahead of them on this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for breaking that down, David. I know it's a difficult topic to dive into, but I know it's one that a lot of people are dealing with every day in terms of using transit. So I wanted to wrap up a story we touched on a few weeks ago. There is a public hearing this week about a change to the Seattle Tourism Improvement Area. So a quick review on this, folks. The STIA is a business improvement area. There are a number of them around the city. They have special taxation rates agreed upon by the people who own property there for services like the downtown ambassadors, for example. The STIA is a little bit different. It charges a certain fee per hotel room. Those dollars go towards promoting tourism. So two big changes here with this new STIA. The city is expanding the boundaries of the STIA to include more of the SoDo region, it looks like. And also they're changing the fee on the hotel rooms to a percentage of the room cost. 2.3% of that cost rather than a flat fee of $4, which it is right now. City says 72% of the businesses in the STIA are actually on board with this. The new fees will bring in more money, about $15 million is estimated. Why is this a big deal? I was just looking inside the numbers. Our tourism industry looked better this year, but it's definitely not up to what it was. We're still about 20,000 tourism jobs short of where we were pre-pandemic. And David, I just wanted to touch on this larger issue. I often forget about how big the industry of tourism is for Seattle. How important of a driver do you see it for the region? And maybe how is this STIA expansion and these new fees, how's that going to help?
Yeah, I think a lot of stock has been put into tourism coming back by particularly the Downtown Seattle Association. cruises are certainly back, but I think for Downtown Seattle Association, a lot of Bruce Harrell, mayor, bringing back foot traffic and tourism is kind of a big seen as a very important part of revitalizing downtown. The jobs numbers are interesting because I think part of that, of course, is some of the lingering effects of the pandemic. I'd be curious to know how much of that also is just these jobs don't pay super well, so it's like and Seattle's getting more expensive. How much of it is also effects of that I think we'll see more and more of is like service jobs and things like that are going to be harder to fill in Seattle as things get more expensive. And I also think since the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of tourist industries have tried to kind of streamline operations. You see a lot more walk-up counters than you do kind of full-service restaurants these days. So that's a little bit of a tangent. But as far as the fee goes, it's interesting to see how much support there is for that. I think it's sort of a bit of a union of sorts. It's seen as a collective good. So I think it's an example of something that it seems to work because it's self-driving on the people who would benefit the most from it. And if they feel like it's worth paying more money for it, then good for them. It's their prerogative to do that.
Yeah, they're going to levy it against themselves. There was another factoid here I drew out, David, that international visits are a big focus right now. Those visits are down close to 70% compared to the pre-pandemic levels. And I know this is a big global question to ask here, but how do you get those visitors back? That's a big piece of this puzzle, at least according to Visit Seattle and these other groups that are very concerned about it.
Yeah, I don't know. Sign Shohei Ohtani to the Mariners. I don't know. I like you said, I doubt that's a Seattle issue. I think that's probably just still people staying closer to home than they maybe once did. Mm-hmm. I think things in the airline industry are starting to stabilize a little bit. For a while there, it was super expensive and super unreliable to travel long distances, and so
I
think that I would be surprised if there's any one thing that the Downtown Seattle Association, for example, could do to get more German visitors or whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, there's a ton of different, and it's a very interesting report, folks, if you want to check out what's happening in the committee this week. And they're talking about $7.3 billion in visitor spending every year. And that means that $20 million spent basically every day on average by visitors in King County. So this is a big story here. And I thought it was very interesting, David. They said the optimum business mix in terms of activity happening in Seattle, it looks like this. It's an equation. 2 Taylor Swift concerts, okay. Then you throw on 3 Mariners versus Blue Jays. You get the Canadian people coming in. 6 cruise dockings, 2 conventions, and a number of festivals. And that's the equation somehow. So I don't know how they worked out those numbers, but Taylor Swift alone, I think, is the big driver on that one. So anyway, looks like that's on its way to passage with the city council this week. So we'll see what happens there. Coming up next year, we're talking about a traffic collision, a $20 million claim filed, and maybe some answers. David's got the story next on Transportation Talk. David, you wrote recently about how attorneys filed a $20 million claim against the state after a crash that killed a young man in Tacoma back in July. He was one of 6 young people killed in that crash. It's a claim, not a lawsuit yet, but this claim says the intersection at 509 and Alexander Avenue is a well-known danger. The city and state have not addressed it. First up, if you could, can you summarize this case? What's going on with this story? What are the facts behind this?
Yeah, it was this horrible crash in July. There was a Kia, and it had 7 young people in it, all in town, apparently for some kind of conference from Arizona, and they were coming out onto 509 at that intersection and got T-boned by a BMW, and the car caught fire, and 6 of them ended up dying. It's just really horrible. What this claim does is sort of an interesting thing, though, in a broader sense, which is, I think when we talk about traffic safety, there's always a bit of a balance between sort of individual responsibility versus kind of systemic infrastructure. Like, is it the fault of the driver? Is it the fault of the way that the roads were built? I think more often than not, it's some combination of the two. But I think in this case, there are some reports that a red light was run or there was speeding involved. But what they're arguing is that, despite that, had the road been designed differently, had there been more warning, whatever it might have been, even a mistake on the part of one of these drivers wouldn't have led to such a deadly crash. I don't know how well. I don't know sort of what the history of claims like this is.
Right.
But if it's successful, it's interesting because it would seem to put a lot more responsibility on part of government agencies to recognize where their kind of most dangerous areas are and to do something about it. If not, then it ends up being kind of a personal responsibility case, and in which case that kind of lets Tacoma and the state of Washington off the hook a little bit. End of the day, it's a really tragic thing, and it's horrible always to think and write about these crashes. But its result will be, again, kind of interesting for how we dole out blame when something terrible like this happens.
Yeah, and it makes me think, too, at least what I've seen with this claim, and you're writing about it, this whole idea of, okay, there's this really long straightaway that led up to this intersection, which I'm not going to say that forces people to speed or anything along those lines, but that's kind of what the claim's saying. It's this long stretch we can really build up a lot of speed there. And I just think about that when you talk about what could happen with this case. I know a lot of intersections in my neighborhood where that happens there. And I just wonder how something like this might set a precedent and how other governments might react to something like this. This is something that could have some pretty far-reaching impacts, it feels like to me.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I don't think it would like literally be precedent setting, but people might, other cases like this, the lawyers might look to it and say, if that was successful, then we can do too. If it's settled out of court, which a claim, it sort of leaves open that possibility, and oftentimes these things are, then I don't know that it would get to that point. And that might be what this family wants, which is their right and their prerogative. But if it does go to trial and there's a ruling on it, then that it could raise a lot of questions about crashes or incidents like this again in the future.
Yeah, it's just it's an interesting case, and you're right. The bottom line of it is this was a tragic, multiple death crash here. That it was terrible to see this back in the summer, and we'll see where this court piece goes with this claim happening right now. Thank you very much for breaking that down with me here, David. Need to wrap up with you and David, as we often talk about on this show, more often than I'd like to say. Troubled times for the Mariners here in September, especially. I'm one of those fans who thinks, sometimes just by watching the game, maybe I'm bringing the bad vibes. Do you have any similar qualms about watching the M's these days?
Yeah, I don't know. I never watched the first half of games anymore just because of my the schedule with my kid. But I tuned into the second half, and boy, last night's was about as heartbreaking as we can get. I'm starting to get to the point where I feel like they need to win the next two games, otherwise the season is kind of in trouble.
Oh, man, I have that feeling too. And it's something about I can't watch, I don't watch. I'm usually the first half guy, so I'm glad we're able to trade off like that. I jump in for the first half, just kind of go away thinking, oh, this is looking really good. And then, I don't know what to say. But I tell you what, David, we'll keep the good vibes going as best we can for the Mariners on this show. That's the way we do it here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. And thanks, everybody, for listening. You can always find out right here what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Please also find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Show your support there. We really, really need you, folks. We'd love to have you support the show. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.